Hello, this is Coding Gicha for full-stack developers. I will now set up the environment for developing the previously created Deno project in Visual Studio Code. Let's launch Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code allows you to add multiple project folders to a workspace and develop them together. Projects developed using languages that require compilation, such as Java, require configuring the development environment through a project manager. This can cause other projects in the workspace to load slowly. Since this does not affect the PHP project developed earlier, I will add the Deno project folder to the workspace I was working on. In Visual Studio Code, path settings in the user and workspace configurations are applied based on the path of the first project folder. Therefore, I will move the Deno web project to the top. Initially, some parts of the Deno environment had to be configured within the workspace, but since this has been improved to allow everything to be configured within the project folder, it is no longer necessary to move it to the top. Let's install the Deno extension for Visual Studio Code. Installing the Deno extension allows you to develop more in accordance with standard ECMAScript syntax, not only for back-end development but also for front-end development. Therefore, I personally recommend the Deno extension even if you do not use Deno for back-end development. Once the Deno extension is installed, the Deno version is displayed in the status bar. While the amount of information displayed in the status bar will gradually increase, honestly, the Deno version display is not particularly useful. I will leave it as is for now to see how much the status bar space is reduced due to the Deno version display. Since AI support is a hot topic these days, Visual Studio Code also supports AI via Copilot. However, seeing keywords unrelated to development progress while typing can actually hinder concentration. Furthermore, the keywords can clutter the code, and clearing those cluttered keywords while developing can be even more inconvenient. I will set a toggle shortcut so that AI keywords are visible only when necessary. I will set it to Shift-Alt-C. You can configure Deno settings on a project-by-project basis. I only intended to edit the project configuration file, but as mentioned earlier, the AI is suggesting unnecessary syntax that has absolutely nothing to do with my intentions. I will clear the suggested keywords. I will turn off AI autocompletion. I will enable Deno. The Deno configuration file is deno.json. If the deno.json file is located in the project directory root, it will be automatically recognized without needing to configure it explicitly. Visual Studio Code suggests a JSON file, but if you create a project using Deno init, a JSON file is generated. For this video, I will use the JSON file as per Deno's default settings. Visual Studio Code supports formatters for TypeScript, JavaScript, JSON, and JSON-C based on Node.js. Since I have installed the Deno extension, additional formatters have been added. I need to configure which formatter to use. If you use the default formatter provided by Visual Studio Code for TypeScript, it may be inconvenient due to some differences from ECMAScript in terms of default import syntax. I will also set the JavaScript formatter to the Deno formatter. JSON does not support comments, but JSON-C does. Visual Studio Code's preferences file is JSON, but it is configured to allow comments just like JSON-C. To ensure these settings are properly recognized, it is recommended to keep the Visual Studio Code JSON formatter for both JSON and JSON-C. I will launch the integrated terminal. I will check the deno tasks registered in the deno.json file. I will run the dev task to start the deno server. While you can develop by executing commands directly in the integrated terminal, utilizing the tasks supported by Visual Studio Code allows for more convenient execution using keyboard shortcuts and cursor movement. I have set the shortcut to view the list of tasks in Visual Studio Code to Shift-Alt-T. There are currently no registered tasks. I will configure the tasks. Tasks are managed in the .versus code/tasks.json file. Since there is no suitable template available, I will write based on the first template. I will write a Visual Studio Code task that starts a deno dev task. Since multiple project folders can be organized together in a workspace, I will use a prefix in the label to easily distinguish the projects. Although further configuration is required, I will save it in this state and run the task. Since I set the reveal setting in the presentation settings to silent, it started in the background. Once the deno server starts, it continues to listen, and the build group will continuously display building in the status bar until it finishes. The building indicator on the status bar will disappear only after the deno server is shut down. I will remove the group settings. I will also change the problem matcher to fit deno. If you install the deno extension, the deno version displayed in the status bar only takes up space, so I will remove it. I will open a TypeScript file. If you have installed the deno extension, a warning appears in editor language status when you open a TypeScript or JavaScript file. However, since I have configured the TypeScript and JavaScript formatters in user settings, no warning is displayed. I will open the deno.json file. Although the JSON file has a formatter configured, a warning appears in editor language status. This is because the setting for whether to trust the deno.json file schema is not configured. If you hover your mouse over the editor language status icon, you can see that the location is untrusted. I will add the deno.json schema address to trusted domains. The deno.land address has been added. Also, the warning on the editor language status icon has disappeared. JavaScript running in the browser must be able to access DOM objects. When you configure libcompiler options, the values are set automatically and the browser-wide library is DOM. Since this conflicts with deno.window, I will remove it and manually configure it using DOM-related libraries. I will cover how to transpile TypeScript into JavaScript so that it can be used on the front end in a separate video. Thank you for watching.